So today, we're going to dig into the story behind a single, really powerful number, the idea that 1 in 4 college women is a victim of sexual assault. Now, this is a statistic that has literally shaped policy and public debate for years. In this explainer, we're going to trace that number from where it came from to the impact it's had, all based on our source material.
You've almost certainly heard it before. 1 in 4. It's an absolutely startling statistic, and it's been at the center of this conversation for decades. But the question is, where did it actually come from? That's what we're here to unpack.
Okay, so the first thing you need to get your head around is that the data on this is, well, it's all over the place. Just look at 1990. The FBI reported a little over 100,000 rapes, but that same year, the National Victims Center estimated almost 700,000. And then you have the 1 in 4 college statistic, which suggests a number way, way higher than either of those. This huge gap is really at the heart of the whole debate.
To really understand the 1 in 4 number, we've got to go back to its source, a big, influential survey from 1985 on college campuses. It was commissioned by M's magazine and led by a researcher named Mary Koss.
Now, according to our source, the way this study was designed was really shaped by a particular academic viewpoint. And this quote from its director, Mary Koss, pretty much sums it up. The idea was that rape isn't some totally separate monstrous act, but that it exists on a spectrum with what was considered normal male behavior.
So how did the study actually get its results? Well, it all came down to a list of questions they asked women about their experiences. If a woman answered yes to any of these 3 specific questions you see here, the researchers classified that experience as a completed rape. The study's findings made huge waves, but our source material shows that its methods and how it interpreted the data quickly came under some serious critical scrutiny. So let's break down what those critics were looking at. First up, the headline number. The study's big conclusion was that a total of 27.5% of the women they surveyed were victims of either rape or attempted rape. That's based on the researchers' own criteria. And that number, 27.5%, was pretty quickly rounded down and became the famous 1 in 4.
And this brings us to the absolute core of the critique laid out in our source. When they asked the very same women, the ones the researchers had just classified as rape victims, how they would label the experience, things looked different. Only 27% of them actually called it rape. Almost half called it miscommunication. Others said, yeah, it was a crime, but not rape, or that they didn't feel victimized at all.
Let me put that as plainly as possible. Our source emphasizes that nearly 3/4, 73% of the women who the study counted as rape victims did not themselves believe they had been raped. This massive disconnect between the definition the researchers used and what the women themselves felt is the central criticism.
But the critique digs even deeper, right into the legal justification for that alcohol or drugs question. See, the study cited an Ohio rape law to back up its criteria. The thing is, our source alleges that a really key part of that law was left out, a clause that specifically excluded situations where someone is just, given drinks in the hope that it might lead to something.
So what's the big deal about this one question? Well, the impact is massive. According to the source, the study's director later admitted that this particular question was ambiguous. And get this, if you remove the yes answers to just that one question, the author says the statistic plummets from 1 in 4 all the way down to 1 in 9. That's a huge difference.
The author of our source argues this wasn't just a one-off issue with a single study. They suggest it was part of a pattern of what they call advocacy research, and they see it in other influential studies too.
So the critique widens out. Take the 1992 Kilpatrick study, which came up with the 1 in 8 statistic for adult women. The author points to a survey question that lumps together forced digital penetration with rape by an object. And the argument from the source is that this kind of methodological choice may have ended up inflating the final statistic for rape. The source uses this quote from sociologist Eugene Cannon, who was actually a pioneer in acquaintance rape research, to kind of sum up this whole perspective. The idea that these studies were blurring the line between objective social science and passionate activism.
Okay, so why are we spending all this time on a decades-old methodological debate? Because, as the author argues, this statistic didn't just stay in academic papers. It jumped into the real world and had some pretty profound consequences.
The 1 in 4 statistic spread like wildfire and became deeply embedded in our culture.
It was popularized by the M's magazine report, it was chanted at rallies, it was cited by politicians pushing for laws like the Violence Against Women Act, and you can still find it in campus materials even today.
And according to the source, this had a direct effect on where the money went. The story of a campus rape crisis helped steer millions of dollars toward university programs. But at the same time, the author argues, community rape crisis centers, which often serve people in areas with much higher reported crime rates, were frequently left struggling to get by.
Our source highlights the kind of skepticism that grew around the number, which is captured pretty well in this quote from the author Katie Royfight. It's that sort of, wait a minute, does this really line up with the reality I see around me kind of question?
All right, this brings us to the source's biggest, broadest argument. It moves beyond just this one statistic to a really fundamental disagreement about the root cause of rape in the United States.
So the debate is framed like this. On one side, there's the view that rape is the result of a specific patriarchal rape culture. But the source puts forward a counterargument that America's high rate of rape is actually a symptom of a much wider problem, that we live in a generally and exceptionally violent society. And to back this idea up, the source points to international crime data. The U.S. rape rate is cited as being 7 times higher than the average in Europe, but here's the kicker. The author notes that the same gap exists for other violent crimes, like homicide and robbery, which suggests a broader pattern of violence, not something unique to rape. And this is the final piece of the argument. The source contends that if patriarchy itself was the main driver, then you'd expect more patriarchal societies to have higher rape rates. But it points to countries like Japan, which it describes as more patriarchal but far less violent overall, and notes they have much, much lower reported rates of rape. So, we've followed this single statistic from its creation, through all the critiques of its methodology, all the way to its lasting impact on our society. And it leaves us with a pretty big critical question to think about. When activism and social movements depend on data to make their case, what makes that data truly trustworthy?